The city breathes in secrets and exhales violence, where power is measured in blood and loyalty lasts only until the highest bidder calls. When Detective Nate Holloway stumbles onto a brutal gangland murder, it seems like just another night in the underbelly of Crimean Till. He finds a list hidden in the dead man's jacket. A list of names, some crossed out, some still waiting, and at the very bottom his own. Now, with every step, every clue, and every bullet that rips through the shadows, Nate is running out of time, hunted by forces far bigger than he ever imagined. Betrayal lurks in every corner. Friends become enemies. Enemies become something worse. And in a city where survival means knowing who to trust, the might already be too late. Detective Nate Holloway stepped into the damp alley, his shoes slapping against the slick pavement as red and blue police lights flashed off the surrounding brick walls. The stench of garbage mixed with the unmistakable metallic tang of blood as officers cordoned off the area, their radios crackling with dispatch updates. The body lay slumped against a dumpster, a bullet hole dead center in his forehead, blood pooling beneath his collapsed form. Nate crouched down, scanning the dead man's face, trying to place him. But the victim wasn't someone he recognized from the usual street crews. A wallet was already bagged by the responding officers, but something else caught Nate's eye, the corner of a folded paper sticking out from the dead man's inside jacket pocket. With gloved hands, he carefully extracted it, unfolded it under the dim yellow glow of a flickering alley light, and saw a list of names, written in neat, deliberate handwriting. Some names were crossed out, some were untouched, and the last name on the list made him freeze his own. His grip tightened on the paper as he quickly scanned the names above his, spotting a few that were vaguely familiar: street-level criminals, low-level enforcers, and even a name he knew belonged to a vice detective. The sound of hurried footsteps yanked his attention away from the paper, and he shoved it into his coat pocket just as Officer Ramirez stepped up beside him, handing over the initial crime scene report. The body belonged to one Victor Leone, an independent fixer known to work between rival gangs, someone who thrived by staying neutral until now. Ramirez mentioned that there were no witnesses yet, but an old security camera perched on the corner of the alley might have caught something, and the officers were already tracking down the feed. Nate nodded, stood, and walked to where forensics was bagging evidence, his mind already shifting into motion. But before he could speak, his partner, Detective Sarah Connolly, strode up with her usual confidence, tossing a file into his hands. She had already run Leone's name through the system and found he had been meeting with a known Mafia lieutenant just 2 nights ago. The lieutenant, Anthony Morello, was known for handling contracts for the Vitelli family, the most powerful crime syndicate in the city. As Sarah continued rattling off details, the coroner arrived, pulling a sheet over Leone's body, and Nate knew they needed to move fast. He motioned for Sarah to follow, striding toward their car, ignoring the cold night air biting at his face. There was only one way to start unraveling this mess: find Morello, and find out who wrote that list before another name got crossed off. The car sped through the rain-slicked streets as Nate gripped the wheel, his knuckles white, while Sarah sat beside him, flipping through her phone, scanning intel on Anthony Morello's last known whereabouts. A tip from Ramirez led them to a nightclub on the east side, a Vitelli-controlled spot called Luca's, a known meeting ground for the city's power players and criminals who operated above the law. Nate pulled the car into an alley 2 blocks away, killing the headlights before stepping out, his coat whipping in the wind as Sarah adjusted her holster. They moved fast, cutting through side streets before emerging onto the main strip, where Luca's pulsed with deep bass, a line of impatient patrons wrapping around the block, while 2 massive bouncers worked the entrance. Instead of heading for the front, Nate motioned toward the side, where a private entrance led to the VIP section, a door guarded by a bald, thick-necked enforcer he recognized as Marco Santino, an old-school bruiser for the Vitelli family. Nate didn't bother with pleasantries, just flashed his badge, watching Marco's jaw tighten before the man stepped aside, pushing open the door and waving them through. Inside, music vibrated through the walls as they stepped into a dimly lit corridor leading toward the lounge, where heavy cigar smoke hung thick in the air. Morello sat in a corner booth, flanked by two men who reeked of muscle for hire, his gold watch glinting under the moody neon lights as he swirled a glass of whiskey. Nate didn't hesitate, stepping forward and yanking Morello up by the collar, slamming him hard against the wall before either of his bodyguards could react. "I need answers, and I need them now," Nate growled, shoving the crumpled list against Morello's chest, watching the man's face darken as his eyes darted across the names. Before Morello could respond, one of his guards lunged, but Sarah was faster, driving a knee into the man's gut before twisting his arm back and slamming him face first into the table, scattering whiskey glasses and poker chips. The second thug reached for his gun, but Nate pulled his own first, jamming it under the guy's chin, forcing him to freeze. "Talk," Nate ordered, his voice sharp over the thumping bass, and Morello, breathing heavy, finally nodded, raising his hands. "That list whoever's putting those names down. They aren't stopping till it's done," Morello muttered, his voice low, his eyes shifting toward the front entrance like he was expecting someone to burst in at any second. Nate pressed harder. "Who wrote it?" Morello hesitated, then exhaled sharply. "I don't know who gave the order, but I know where it came from," he admitted, licking his lips before whispering a name and sent a cold pulse through Nate's chest. "It's Vitelli, the head of the entire syndicate, the man who never got his hands dirty, who controlled the city's underground like a chessboard." Nate didn't have time to process before Morello's eyes suddenly went wide, his body stiffening as a sharp pop rang out from across the room, followed by the splatter of blood against the velvet roof. Morello slumped forward, a bullet hole clean through the side of his skull, and before Nate could even turn, chaos, erupted screams, tables flipping, bodies scrambling for cover as a hooded figure with a silenced pistol melted into the crowd, disappearing through the side exit. Nate swore, shoving Sarah forward as more gunfire erupted, forcing them both to dive for cover. Whoever was tying up loose ends wasn't wasting time, and now, with Morello dead, the only lead they had was buried 6 feet under. Nate shoved Sarah ahead of him, his grip tightening on her arm as they ducked low and pushed through the panicked crowd. The nightclub, now a frenzy of bodies crashing into tables, glass shattering underfoot as more gunshots cracked through the air. His eyes locked onto the shooter's exit, a metal door at the back swinging shut, and he surged forward, knocking over a man in a designer suit who was scrambling for cover. Bursting through the door, Nate emerged into a narrow service alley, the air thick with the scent of burnt gunpowder and city grime, his gun raised as his eyes scanned the darkness. A shadow moved past a figure in all black, sprinting toward the chain-link fence at the alley's end. "Stop," Nate roared, but the shooter didn't slow, vaulting up the fence with practiced ease. Nate fired once, the shot sparking off the metal inches from the target's foot, but the assassin was already over, hitting the pavement on the other side and disappearing into the maze of side streets. "Damn it," he growled, rushing forward, grabbing the fence and hauling himself up, the rough metal bit into his hands as he swung over and landed hard, rolling to absorb the impact before pushing forward, his feet pounding against the wet asphalt. The shooter was fast, weaving through an old industrial lot where rusted shipping containers created a maze of cover. Sarah's footsteps echoed behind as she caught her breath controlled despite the sprint. The assassin darted between 2 stacked containers, and Nate followed without hesitation, his heart hammering in his chest as he turned the corner only to be met with a blur of movement. A knee slammed into his ribs, knocking the air from his lungs as he stumbled back, barely dodging a follow-up strike aimed at his throat. The assassin was on him, fast and precise, their face still masked beneath the hood as they lashed out again. But this time, Nate was ready. He caught the attacker's wrist, twisted hard, and drove his shoulder forward, slamming them into the metal container with a dull clang. The figure grunted but twisted free, kicking out and catching Nate at the side of the head. He staggered but didn't go down, lunging forward with brute force, tackling the shooter to the ground, just as Sarah rounded the corner, her gun raised. "Hold it," she snapped, but the assassin bucked against Nate's grip, pulling a blade from a concealed holster and slicing upwards. Nate barely dodged the slash, rolling off just in time to avoid getting gutted. The attacker was back on their feet instantly, body coiled like a spring, but the distant wail of sirens cut through the night, flashing red and blue lights reflecting off the metal surfaces around them. For the first time, the assassin hesitated. It was all Nate needed. He surged forward, swinging hard, but the figure ducked, dodging fluidly before twisting and taking off toward an abandoned warehouse at the lot's edge. "Go left," Nate barked at Sarah, breaking into a sprint as they split up, flanking the building from opposite sides. The assassin burst through a shattered doorway, disappearing inside, and Nate followed, his gun raised as he swept through the darkness. The place was a skeleton of metal beams and old machinery, the ceiling yawning high above with broken skylights that let in shafts of pale moonlight. He moved cautiously, scanning every shadow, every corner, untuned movement. A flash of black cutting across the floor above. He aimed, feared a bullet splintered the railing where the assassin had just been. "Give it up," he shouted, but the only answer was the sound of rapid footsteps retreating toward the far side. Sarah's voice crackled over his radio. "I'm on the south exit, cutting them off." Nate rushed forward, leaping over rusted debris, making his way up a metal staircase 2 steps at a time. He reached the second level, just in time to see the assassin reaching for a window, intending to jump. "Don't move!" Nate fired a warning shot, the bullet pinging off the metal frame. For a moment, the assassin hesitated again, the first real sign of uncertainty, but then they did something unexpected. They turned slowly, lifting their hands in surrender. Nate kept his gun locked on them as he moved closer, his pulse still hammering. But the second he reached out, the assassin moved, fast flicking something from their sleeve. A small metallic object clattered to the floor. Smoke grenade. Shit. Nate barely had time to react before white smoke exploded between them, choking visibility. He swung wildly, but the assassin was already gone, vanishing into the haze just as Sarah came bursting in from the other side. "Where?" she started, but Nate just clenched his jaw, listening, searching. But all he heard was the distant sound of footsteps fading into the night. Whoever they were skilled, professional, and more importantly, they weren't done yet. Nate burst through the dissipating smoke, his lungs burning as he pushed forward. But the assassin had already slipped away into the maze of the city, leaving nothing behind except the lingering scent of gunpowder and scorched metal. Sarah came up behind him, breathing hard, her gun still drawn as she scanned the empty lot, her frustration evident in the tension in her jaw. "They were good," she muttered, holstering her weapon as Nate kicked over a loose crate in frustration, his mind racing through the events of the night. Morello was dead, the list was still in his pocket, and now someone was actively tying up loose ends before he could get ahead of them. He didn't have time to stand around turning on his heel. He strode toward the squad car, already pulling out his phone to call Ramirez back at the precinct. "I need a name. Anything." He barked into the receiver as Sarah slid into the passenger seat, wiping the sweat from her brow. Ramirez was already digging. His voice rushed. "Just got the club's security feed," he said, tapping away at a keyboard. "Your shooter was in and out, fast face covered, no fingerprints on the door, no clear ID." Nate cursed under his breath as he started the engine, peeling away from the lot, the car's tires screeching against the wet pavement. "We need to get ahead of this," he muttered, half to himself, half to Sarah. "Whoever put that list together, whoever's crossing out names, they're running out of people." Sarah glanced at him, her brow furrowed. "You think we're next?" The question hung in the air for a second too long before Nate responded. "I don't plan on waiting to find out." They drove in silence for a few blocks before he turned sharply down a side street, heading toward the only place that made sense, the one man who might have an answer before another body dropped, Tommy Ricci. A bookie, a fixer, and a low-level associate with just enough ties to the Patelli family to know what was going on, but not enough to be in the line of fire himself. If anyone had heard whispers of this hit list before, it was him. They pulled up outside a dingy bar on the west side, the neon sign flickering above the entrance, casting a sickly red glow onto the sidewalk. Nate stepped out first, scanning the street before pushing through the door, the smell of stale beer and cigarette smoke hitting him instantly. A eyes narrowing the second he saw Nate and Sarah approaching. "Whatever it is, I don't know about it," he muttered before Nate could even open his mouth. Nate wasn't in the mood for games. She grabbed the stool next to Tommy, leaned in close, and slid the folded piece of paper onto the bar, tapping it once. "Try again." Tommy hesitated, his fingers twitching toward the glass before he finally exhaled and grabbed the list, unfolding it slowly. His face paled. "Jesus," he muttered, running a hand through his slicked back hair. "Where the hell did you get this?" "Off a corpse," Nate said flatly. "And if we don't figure out who's behind it, there's going to be a lot more." Tommy swallowed hard. His eyes darted around the bar like he was calculating how much trouble he'd be in just for talking. Finally, he sighed and leaned in. "All right, listen, word on the street is the Vitellis got spooked. Something big went sideways, and now they're cleaning house. Fast." "Spooked how?" Sarah pressed. Tommy licked his lips, lowering his voice. "Someone stole something from them. Something important. I don't know what, but I heard whispers, whatever it was. It wasn't just money or drugs. This is bigger. And now, anyone who might have been involved, even by accident, they're getting erased." Nate felt his pulse quicken. This wasn't just a routine power play, this was damage control. "Who stole it?" he asked, his voice sharp. Tommy shook his head. "Nobody knows. But there's a rumor, the last guy on that list. He's not just a target," he hesitated, then looked Nate dead in the eye. "He might be the one holding the key to all of this." Nate barely had time to process before the door of the bar suddenly burst open. Cold night air rushing in as three men in dark suits stepped inside, their faces unreadable, their movements deliberate. Vitelli enforcers. Nate didn't need to hear a word to know why they were here. "Time to go," he muttered, already reaching. Nate's grip tightened around his gun as the three enforcers spread out, their slow, deliberate steps echoing against the scuffed wooden floor of the bar, the scent of spilled liquor mixing with the tension in the air. Tommy Ricci swallowed hard, his fingers twitching against the rim of his glass, as if debating whether to run or pretend he wasn't part of this. But it was too late. These men weren't here for drinks. The tallest of them, a broad-shouldered man with slicked-back hair and dead eyes, let his coat fall open just enough to reveal the heavy pistol holstered at his side, the universal language of intimidation. "Detective," he said smoothly, his voice low, almost amused. "We hear you've been asking questions that don't concern you." Nate didn't flinch, didn't blink, just let his own coat part slightly, showing his badge on one hip, his holstered gun on the other. "A lot concerns me when people start dropping dead," he said evenly, scanning the room, calculating angles. Sarah was already shifting subtly to the left, giving herself a clear shot, her muscles coiled like a loaded spring. The enforcer nodded as if he understood, then sighed, reaching into his pocket, too slow to be a weapon, but Nate's fingers still twitched on his own gun. Instead, the man pulled out a folded envelope and slid it onto the bar in front of him. "Consider this a professional courtesy," he said. "Walk away tonight and don't ask any more questions." Nate didn't take his eyes off him as he reached for the envelope, flipping it open with one hand. Inside was a single sheet of paper, a grainy surveillance photo clipped to it. The image was dark, but the figure was unmistakable an assassin from the club. A name was scrawled underneath in block letters: Milo Varga. Nate had heard the name before. An Eastern European gun for hire, ruthless, efficient, and more importantly, untouchable. If the Vitellis had hired him, that meant whatever was happening here was bigger than a simple cleanup job. "What's the play here?" Nate asked, watching the enforcer's expression carefully. "You want us to take care of him for you?" The man smirked, but his eyes stayed cold. "We want you to stay out of it. Varga's not your problem," he turned, nodding toward his men, ready to leave, but Nate wasn't done. "One more thing," he said, making the enforcer pause. "What was stolen?" The man's expression barely changed, but something in his eyes flickered just for a fraction of a second. "Like I said," he replied smoothly, stepping toward the door, "not your problem." And then they were gone, vanishing into the cold night, leaving behind only the faint scent of expensive cologne and and a silence so heavy it felt suffocating. Tommy let out a shaky breath. "Jesus," he muttered. "That was a warning. They don't give second ones." Nate folded the paper and shoved it into his pocket, his mind already racing. Varga was the key. If he found him, he'd get answers. But he wasn't naive. If the Vitellis wanted this buried so badly, it meant finding Varga wasn't just dangerous. It was a death sentence. He glanced at Sarah, who met his gaze with a meaning look. "We're doing this, aren't we?" she asked. He nodded, already pushing away from the bar. "Yeah," he said, "we're doing this." Nate barely had time to process the warning before the sound of screeching tires outside snapped his instincts into overdrive. His hand flying to his gun as he grabbed Sarah's arm and yanked her down just as the front window of the bar exploded in a hail of bullets. Glass and wood splintered as patrons screamed and ducked for cover, the roar of automatic fire drowning out everything else. Tommy Ricci was already diving behind the counter, his face pale as bottles shattered around him, whiskey and gin spilling across the floor. Nate rolled behind an overturned table, his gun drawn, Sarah beside him, both exchanging a brief glance before he peeked out, catching sight of a black SUV parked across the street, its passenger window down, the muzzle flashes from an SMG lighting up the night. He didn't hesitate, firing 2 quick shots, forcing the gunman back into cover, but another burst of fire raked the bar, kicking up splinters as the bartender screamed and scrambled toward the back. "We need to move," Sarah shouted, popping up to fire off a shot before ducking back down as more bullets chewed through the furniture. Nate's mind worked fast. They weren't here to send a message. They were here to end it. He scanned the room, spotted a side exit past the pool tables, and made his decision. "Cover me," he barked, then pushed off the ground, sprinting low and fast as Sarah laid down suppressing fire, her shots sparking off the SUV's frame. He crashed through the door into a narrow alley, rain slicking the pavement as he turned sharply, already hearing Sarah's footsteps behind him as she followed. The SUV's engine roared. The shooters weren't done. The vehicle suddenly jerked forward, tires screeching as it barreled toward the alley, its headlights cutting through the darkness. "Move! Move!" Nate yelled, shoving Sarah ahead just as the SUV slammed into a stack of trash bins, sending metal and debris flying. They darted through the maze of back streets, their breaths sharp and controlled, but the SUV wasn't giving up, its engine growling as it maneuvered around the tight corners, hunting them like prey. Nate spotted a fire escape ladder above and skidded to a stop. "Up!" he ordered, lacing his fingers together, but without hesitation. Sarah planted a foot in his hands and vaulted up, grabbing the bottom rung and hauling herself onto the metal stairs. Nate jumped, gripping the edge just as the SUV fishtailed into the alley, the gunman inside opening fire again. Bullets pinged off the rusted metal as he scrambled up, gripping the railing as Sarah pulled him onto the platform. The SUV's doors swung open below 2 masked men stepping out, one still holding an SMG while the other brandished a sleek pistol, their boots splashing through puddles as they aimed up. "Go!" Nate shouted, already running along the fire escape, Sarah close behind, their footsteps echoing against the metal. One of the shooters feared a bullet grazing Nate's coat, but he didn't slow, reaching the top of the ladder and swinging himself over onto the rooftop. Sarah followed, breathing hard, as below them, the gunman hesitated, debating whether to climb or shoot. "We can't outrun a car," she muttered, scanning the rooftop for options. Nate's eyes locked onto a nearby ledge that overlooked a parking lot, a 3-story drop, but there was a dumpster below, its lid open just enough. "We jump," he said, already moving. Sarah barely had time to curse before he leaped, twisting midair and crashing into the dumpster with a bone-rattling thud. He groaned, rolling out onto the pavement, his ribs aching, but there was no time to stop. Sarah landed beside him with a grunt, already back on her feet. The gunman cursed above, realizing they'd lost their advantage. "Come on," Nate growled, dragging himself up and breaking into a sprint as distant sirens began wailing as someone had finally called the cops. But this wasn't over. The Vitellis weren't just sending warnings anymore. They wanted him and Sarah dead, and now, more than ever, they needed to find Milo Bargatti before the next hit found them first. Nate didn't stop running until they were 3 blocks away, cutting through alleys finally came to a stop in a narrow passage between two shuttered storefronts, bracing a hand against the cold brick wall, his breath coming in hard, controlled bursts. Sarah was right behind him, hands on her knees, shaking her head. "They're not playing around anymore," she muttered, wiping rain from her face. Nate exhaled sharply, checking his gun, half a clip left. "Not enough. We need to find Varga. Now." Sarah nodded, already pulling out her phone, scrolling through contacts. "Ramirez might have something on him," she said, hitting dial, putting the call on speaker. The phone barely rang twice before Ramirez picked up, his voice tense. "Jesus, Holloway, where the hell are you? I heard about the bar." "We're fine," Nate said, cutting him off. "We need a location on Milo Varga. Now." Ramirez hesitated. "That's not going to be easy. The guy's a ghost. Interpol has an open file on him, but he's been off the grid for months." "Try harder," Nate snapped. "Someone hired him, and if we don't find him first, we're next." There was silence on the other end for a moment, before Ramirez let out a frustrated sigh. "All right, I've got a possible lead. Word is, Varga's been operating out of an abandoned freight yard on the east side, near the river. No confirmed sightings, but if he's still in the city, that's where he'd be." "Text me the address," Nate said, already moving. Sarah ended the call, glancing at him. "You really think he's still there?" "Doesn't matter," Nate said. "If he is, he answers. If he's not, we'll find out where he's headed next." They moved quickly, cutting through the city's underbelly, avoiding main roads, keeping to the shadows as they made their way toward the docks. The freight yard loomed ahead, a sprawling wasteland of rusted shipping containers and abandoned train cars, the scent of salt and oil thick in the air. They approached cautiously, guns drawn, sticking to the edges of the yard where the cover was best. The place was eerily quiet, no movement, no signs of life, until Nate spotted it. A single light, glowing from the second floor of a decrepit warehouse near the water. He exchanged a glance with Sarah, then motioned forward, keeping low as they crossed the open ground. They reached the side entrance, the metal door slightly ajar. Nate pushed it open, slowly, gun raised, as he stepped inside. The interior was dark, cluttered with old machinery and scattered crates, the faint hum of the generator buzzing in the distance. Then, a sound footsteps above. Someone was here. Nate motioned for Sarah to cover the stairs as he moved toward them, keeping his steps light. As they reached the second floor, the smell of cigarette smoke filled the air, and then they saw him, Milo Varga. He was standing by a table, cleaning a silencer, his jacket unzipped, a pistol tucked into his waistband. He didn't look surprised to see them. Instead, he smirked, flicking his cigarette to the ground. "Took you long enough," he said, his accent thick. "I was beginning to think you wouldn't make it." Nate didn't hesitate, stepped forward, gun leveled. "You're going to tell me everything," he said. Varga chuckled, shaking his head. "No, detective. I don't think I am." And before Nate could react, the lights cut out, plunging the room into darkness. Then came the sound of footsteps, not just Varga's. Someone else was here. They were closing in fast. The darkness swallowed the room, but Nate didn't hesitate, dropped low, pivoting just as the first attacker emerged from the shadows, a flash of steel slicing through the air where his throat had been seconds earlier. He caught the faintest glimpse of movement, a second figure rushing towards Sarah from the opposite side. "Move!" he barked, firing blind, the muzzle flash illuminating the chaos for a split second. Varga was gone, slipping into the shadows, and Nate barely had time to twist as another blow came from his left. A fist slammed into his ribs, forcing him back against a rusted metal railing. He gritted his teeth, felt the air rush out of his lungs, then fought through it, ducking as another blade slashed past his face. He grabbed the attacker's wrist, twisting violently, forcing the knife loose before driving his elbow into their jaw. The figure stumbled, but before Nate could finish them off, another burst of gunfire lit up the room. Sarah had engaged her target, her shots sparking off steel beams as she dove behind the stack of crates. The second attacker kept coming, relentless, and Nate finally caught enough of a glimpse to see their tactical girthies weren't just hired thugs. They were professionals. Someone had sent them to kill Vargan now. They'd settle for him and Sarah. The first attacker recovered fast, swinging again, and Nate barely dodged before slamming the butt of his gun into their temple. The man crumpled, unconscious, but there was no time to breathe. Sarah let out a sharp grunt as she was tackled hard, her gun skidding across the floor. Nate turned, firing at her attacker, but before his bullet could land, Varga reappeared. The assassin moved like a ghost, kicking Nate's arm aside just as he pulled the trigger, forcing the shot wide. Then Varga was on him fast, brutal, precise. A punch to the ribs, another to the throat. Nate stumbled back, choking for air, as Varga spun, disarming him in one fluid motion and sending his gun clattering into the dark. "You don't understand, Detective," Varga muttered, his voice calm despite the chaos. "I'm not your enemy." He moved to finish the fight, but Nate had enough surged forward, grabbing Varga by the collar and driving him through an old wooden work table. The impact sending papers and tools flying. The assassin groaned, stunned, and Nate pressed his forearm against his throat. "Start talking," he growled. Before Varga could respond, the room exploded. The blast came from the far side of the warehouse, fire and debris ripping through the walls as the shockwave sent Nate flying backward. His ears rang, his vision blurred, and as he struggled to his feet, he saw their attackers retreating, silhouettes disappearing into the smoke. Varga was gone too. Sarah coughed, staggering toward him, gripping her arm where blood seeped through her sleeve. "We need to go," she gasped. The entire building groaned, metal beams snapping under the strain of the explosion. No choice. Nate grabbed her, pulling her toward the shattered window at the back. "Jump," he ordered. Sarah didn't hesitate. She vaulted out, landing hard on the gravel below. Nate followed just as the second blast hit, the warehouse collapsing behind them in a cloud of fire and steel. They rolled, barely escaping the flames, their bodies battered, but alive. Nate pushed himself up, wiping blood from his temple, his pulse still hammering. Varga had slipped away. But now, there was no doubt someone wanted every loose end erased. And whoever was behind it wasn't just cleaning house. They were preparing for something bigger. Nate pulled Sarah to her feet as the heat from the burning warehouse radiated behind them. The flames licking up the night sky, sending plumes of thick black smoke rolling into the wind. The sirens were already closing in firefighters, cops, maybe even the feds. But Nate knew one thing for sure. They couldn't beat him when they arrived. "Move," he muttered, steadying Sarah as they stumbled through the debris-strewn lot, their shadows stretching long against the flickering glow. His ribs ached from the fight, his vision still swimming from the explosion, but they had no time to process the pain. Varga was gone, and the professionals who had attacked them, they weren't just random hitters. Someone high up had pulled the trigger on that assault, and if Varga was important enough to kill, that meant he was also important enough to keep alive. They needed to find him before the next team did. They slipped through a gap in the chain-link fence, emerging onto an empty service road just as an unmarked sedan pulled up, its headlights cutting through the darkness. Nate reached for his gun and then to remember it had been lost in the fight. The driver's side window rolled down, and Ramirez's face appeared, his expression grim. "Get in," he ordered. Nate hesitated only a second before yanking the back door open and shoving Sarah inside, sliding in after her. Ramirez gunned the engine before they even had their doors closed, the tires squealing as they sped away from the burning wreckage. "What the hell did you two just walk into?" Ramirez demanded, gripping the wheel tight. "Every unit in the city is going to be swarming that place in 5 minutes." Nate exhaled sharply, running a hand through his sweat-slicked hair. "We found Varga. Someone else found him first." "You found him?" Ramirez's eyes flicked to the rearview mirror, disbelief evident. "And you let him get away?" Nate clenched his jaw, ignoring the jab. "Not by choice. Whoever they weren't street thugs. They were trained, tactical. Someone high up doesn't want Varga talking." Ramirez's fingers drummed against the wheel. "And you still think this is just about some hit list?" Sarah leaned forward, still wincing. kill us," Nate corrected. He was stalling. The car went silent for a moment, as the reality of the situation settled over them like a thick fog. Nate turned to Ramirez. "We need to know everything you can pull on Varga. Bank accounts, movement, associates anything that tells us where he's going next." Ramirez let out a heavy breath. "You're asking me to dig into someone who doesn't officially exist?" "That's exactly what I'm asking you to do," Nate said. Ramirez cursed under his breath but nodded, already reaching for his phone. "Fine, but if this gets me burned, I'm flipping on both of you so fast your heads will spin." "Appreciate it," Nate muttered. The car sped deeper into the city, weaving through empty streets as the tension hung thick between them. They were running out of time. Varga was on the move, and whoever wanted him dead wasn't going to stop. If they didn't find him first, the next time his name came up, it would be on a morgue report. The city blurred past in streaks of neon and rain-soaked asphalt as Ramirez drove, his fingers tight around the wheel, while Sarah worked on patching up her arm with a first aid kit she found in the glove compartment. Nate sat in the back, his mind racing, staring out at the city as if the answers were hidden somewhere in the streets. They had no guns, no solid leads, and now they were being hunted alongside Varga. The pieces weren't lining up if the Vitellas had hired Varga in the first place. Why were they trying to kill him now? And more importantly, what had been stolen was worth wiping out an entire enterprise. His phone buzzed. A message from Ramirez's contact bank withdrawal. Varga. 2 hours ago. Safe house suspected. Nate sat forward. "Pull up here," he ordered, and Ramirez didn't question it, yanking the car to the curb in front of a rundown apartment complex on the east side. The place was a relic from a forgotten era. Windows boarded up, graffiti crawling across the walls. "He's in there?" Sarah asked, securing her holster as she stepped out of the car. "Maybe," Nate said, checking the address again, where he was. They moved fast, cutting through the alley beside the building, stepping over discarded needles and crushed beer cans. Nate tested the back door unlocked. That was never a good sign. He pushed it open only, gun still missing, but instinct guiding his every step. The air inside was stale, thick with the scent of sweat and something metallic blood. They found the first body slumped against the railing of the kitchen, a bullet clean through his head. A hired gun, judging by the tactical vest. Another body lay halfway across the room, his hand still clutched around the grip of a pistol, a pool of dark red spreading beneath him. "Varga's handiwork," Sarah murmured, nudging the dead man's shoulder with her boot. He didn't go easy. A creak from upstairs made them both freeze. Nate raised a hand, motioning for Sarah to move left while he took the stairs slow, each step careful, calculated. At the top, a single door stood ajar, dim light spilling through the crack. He pushed it open and stepped inside. Varga. He was slumped against the far wall, one hand pressing against a gunshot wound in his side, his breathing shallow, but his eyes sharp. A pistol lay within arm's reach, but he didn't move for it. It took him long enough. He muttered, coughing. Nate stepped closer. "Who sent them?" Varga exhaled a shaky breath. "Doesn't matter. More are coming." "Then start talking," said impressed, her stance wide, ready for anything. Varga let out a low, humorless chuckle. "You don't get it, do you?" He shifted slightly, wincing as fresh blood leaked through his fingers. "This isn't about a hit list. It never was." Nate clenched his jaw. "Then what?" Varga's lips parted, about to speak, but the window behind him shattered. A sniper round tore through the room, ripping straight through Varga's chest, his body jerking violently before slumping over. Sarah dropped to a knee, gun raised, but there was nothing to shoot, just the distant glint of a scope disappearing into the night. Nate rushed to Varga, but he was already gone, blood pooling beneath him. "Damn it!" Nate slammed a fist against the floor, his pulse hammering. Whoever had wanted Varga dead had just finished the job. But why wait until now? Sarah was already moving, grabbing a piece of paper from Varga's jacket pocket. She unfolded it, her eyes scanning fast before she handed it to Nate. A name, just one, scribbled in Varga's blood. Gabriel Vitelli. Nate's stomach twisted. Gabriel wasn't just part of the Vitelli family, he was the heir. And now, he was the only lead they had left. Nate stuffed the blood-streaked note into his coat pocket, his mind already racing ahead as Sarah checked the window for any sign of the sniper. But whoever had pulled the trigger was long gone, disappearing into the dark rooftops like a ghost. The distant wail of sirens sent a fresh surge of urgency through him. Varga was dead, the safe house was compromised, and the second the cops arrived, they'd be trapped in a crime scene with no weapons and too many bodies to explain. "We need to move," he said sharply, yanking Sarah's sleeve and pulling her toward the stairwell. They took the steps two at a time, moving fast past the corpses littering the lower level before slipping out through the same back alley they came in. The city swallowed as flashing red and blue lights flooded the street behind them. Ramirez was still waiting in the car, engine idling, a fresh cigarette burning between his fingers, his expression shifting from frustration to alarm the second he saw them. "Tell me you didn't just leave more bodies behind," he groaned as Nate slid into the back seat, Sarah slamming the door behind her. "Varga's gone," Nate said, voice clipped. Sniper took him out before he could tell us anything. Ramirez cursed, flicking the cigarette out the window as he hit the gas, merging into traffic just as the first patrol cars screeched onto the scene behind them. "So what now?" he asked, gripping the wheel tight. "We follow the only lead we've got," Nate muttered, pulling out the note and unfolding it again. Gabriel Vitelli. The name felt heavy, electric, charged with danger. Gabriel wasn't just another made guy. Was the Vitelli family's golden son, the heir to everything. And if his name was the last thing Varga had written before a bullet tore through him, it meant he wasn't just involved, was the key to this whole mess. Ramirez let out a low whistle. "Jesus, you're really gonna poke that hornet's nest?" "No choice," Nate said, shoving the paper back into his pocket. "We need to find him before whoever's cleaning house does." "Easier said than done," Sarah added. "He's got security tighter than the mayor's. If he doesn't want to be found, he won't be." Nate stared out the window, watching the city blur past, his mind turning over possibilities. "Then we don't go through him," he said. "We go through someone close to him." Ramirez glanced at him through the rearview mirror. "And who the hell is that?" Nate already had the answer. Gabriel's younger brother, Leo. Unlike his brother, Leo wasn't built for the life he was. Reckless, impulsive, the kind of guy who spent more time in VIP lounges and underground poker games than handling actual family business. If anyone knew where Gabriel was headed, it was him. Nate said, already dialing another number. "But if he's smart, he'll talk before someone else decides to put him in the ground." Ramirez sighed, shaking his head as he switched lanes. "I really hate working with you, Holloway." Nate smirked, eyes still locked on the road ahead. "Yeah," he muttered. "Get in line." The car wove through the city, heading toward an upscale underground poker club tucked beneath a high-end steakhouse on the west side. A place where Leo Vitelli was known to burn through his family's money like it was play cash. Nate kept his jaw tight, running through the angles in his head. Leo was reckless, but he wasn't stupid. He might not have been involved in the deeper layers of the family's business, but he knew how the game was played, and if his brother was hiding, Leo would know where. Ramirez parked a block away, killing the engine as Sarah checked her gun, nodding once before they stepped out into the humid night air. The entrance was discreet, just a set of stairs leading down to a reinforced door with a single camera above it. Nate knocked twice, waited, then knocked once more, a pattern he remembered from a past case. A slot in the door slid open, revealing a pair of cold, suspicious eyes. "No games tonight," the doorman grunted, but before he could close it, Nate shoved his badge against the slot. "Not here to play." There was a pause before the lock clicked, and the door creaked open just enough for them to step inside. The air was thick with cigar smoke and the low murmur of conversation, the scent of whiskey and sweat lingering under the soft glow of chandelier light. High rollers in expensive suits sat around green front tables, stacks of chips in front of them, while waitresses in black dresses moved between them, serving drinks with empty smiles. But Nate wasn't looking at the players, he was looking for Leo, and he found him fast. The younger Vitelli was leaning back in a leather chair near the private tables, laughing too loud, one arm draped around red hair with his other hand, and his pupils were blown wide. Nate guessed it wasn't just alcohol keeping him entertained. He nodded at Sarah, and they moved in. "Leo," Nate called, his voice cutting through the hum of conversation. Leo blinked, his grin fading as he turned to them. His expression shifted instantly from careless amusement to wary calculation. "Detective Holloway," he said slowly, straightening in his chair. "This is a surprise." "Not a social call," Nate said, pulling out the blood-streaked note and tossing it onto the table in front of Leo. The redhead beside him frowned and slid away slightly. "We need to talk." Leo's eyes flicked to the name written there, Gabriel Vitelli. His nostrils flared slightly, and he played it cool, taking a slow sip of his drink before leaning forward. "Where'd you get this?" "Varga," Sarah answered. Before someone put a bullet in him. That got a reaction, a flicker of something fear, but just as quickly, it was buried under a forced smirk. "And you think that means what exactly?" Leo said, gesturing lazily. "That my brother's mixed up in whatever mess you two are chasing?" Nate leaned in, voice low. "I think Gabriel's in trouble, and I think someone in your own family wants him dead." Leo's jaw tightened slightly, but before he could respond, the entire room shifted. The private door at the back of the club swung open, and in walked a woman Nate had never expected to see again, Isabella Rossi. The room went dead silent. Isabella wasn't just anybody, she was a fixer. A legend in the underworld, known for making problems disappear, whether that meant evidence, people, or entire criminal enterprises. And the fact that she was here, now, meant someone had just made this a hell of a lot more complicated. She strolled in, she owned the place, her dark eyes sweeping the room before locking onto Leo, then Nate. "Well," she said smoothly, unbuttoning her coat. "Looks like I walked into something interesting." Then, before anyone could react, she pulled a silenced pistol from her waist, leveled it at Leo, and pulled the trigger. Nate moved on pure instinct, lunging across the table as the suppressed shot hissed through the air, the bullet slicing through the space where Leo's head had been a split second earlier. The redhead screamed, toppling backward as chips and glasses shattered across the felt, bourbon spilling like blood. Leo hit the floor hard, rolling out of the chair just as Isabella adjusted her aim, her expression calm, almost bored. Nate grabbed the edge of the table and flipped it, sending a cascade of poker chips and whiskey tumbling forward as he yanked Leo back behind cover. Sarah was already drawing her weapon, but Isabella was fast. She sidestepped smoothly, dropping to a knee and firing again, this time aiming for Nate. The bullet tore through his sleeve, grazing his arm, but he didn't stop moving, didn't stop thinking. They couldn't fight her here. Not with the entire club frozen in fear, half the patrons too drunk to run, the other half deciding whether they wanted to be heroes or ghosts. "We need to gano." He barked at Sarah, grabbing Leo by the collar and dragging him toward the back exit. Isabella was already standing again, her pistol rising, but before she could fire, Ramirez stormed in. He hadn't waited outside, he'd followed them, just far enough behind to not be noticed. And now he stood at the main entrance, gun drawn, badge flashing in the dim light. "Drop it," he roared, his voice cutting through the stunned silence of the club. For a split second, everyone froze, even Isabella. It was all the time they needed. He yanked Leo up and shoved him through the side door into the alley. Sarah right behind him as Ramirez fired a warning shot into the ceiling, making the room explode into chaos. People screamed. Patrons dove under tables. Security scrambled, half of them drawing their own guns, unsure of who they were supposed to be stopping. But Isabella? She smiled. Just the faintest smirk, like she had already expected this, and then she was gone. 1 second she was there, the next she was weaving through the chaos, slipping into the back corridors, disappearing into the shadows before Ramirez could even turn his sights on her. "Shit," Ramirez muttered, before shoving his way through the crowd, clearing a path as he ran after them. Nate didn't stop, didn't look back, he just ran. The alley stretched out before them, slick with rain, the dim glow of streetlights cutting through the fog as they sprinted toward Ramirez's waiting car. "Move, move." Nate shoved Leo forward, yanking the back door open and practically throwing him inside as Sarah slid in after him. Ramirez skidded to a stop just as Nate slammed the door shut. Then the bullets started flying. Isabella wasn't done. Somewhere from the rooftops above, gunfire erupted, sparking off the pavement, slicing through the night with precision. "Go," Sarah shouted, and Ramirez didn't hesitate, gunning the engine, tires screaming as the car peeled out of the alley just as a bullet shattered the back windshield. Glass rained down, Leo screaming, ducking between the seats as Nate twisted to return fire, but the rooftops were already empty. She was gone. Again, Nate cursed, turning back, his pulse hammering as he looked at Leo, whose face was pale, breath coming in short gasps. "Start talking," he growled, shoving the bloody wound against Leo's chest. "Because that was your last free pass." Leo swallowed hard, glancing at the name scrawled on hard as blood Gabriel Vitelli. He licked his lips, trying to mask the fear in his eyes, but he wasn't fooling anyone. "I don't know where he is," he stammered. "Bullshit," Nate snapped. "Isabella Rossi doesn't put bullets in people unless she has a damn good reason. Your brother is in the middle of this, and you're going to tell me why." Leo hesitated too long. Nate grabbed him by the collar, yanking him close. "You have one chance. Who wants your brother dead?" Leo's lips trembled, his eyes darting to Sarah, then to Ramirez, as if looking for an escape. Then finally, he exhaled shakily and muttered two words. "My father." The car went silent. Nate felt something cold settle in his gut. Vincent Vitelli, the head of the family, the man who controlled the entire city's underworld, and he had put out a hit on his own son. The car skidded to a stop just outside the abandoned distillery, the structure looming like a rusted skeleton against the darkened sky. Rain slicking the pavement as Nate shoved open the door, his gun drawn before his feet even hit the ground. Sarah was right behind him, Ramirez staying in the car with Leo, who was breathing hard, his hands twitching as he fought the urge to bolt. "If you run, I don't stop them from finding you," Ramirez muttered, keeping one eye on the street, watching for incoming threats. Nate didn't wave, moved fast, boots crunching against broken glass as he cut across the lot, scanning the upper windows for movement. The place was dead quiet, too quiet, except for the faint hum of the river in the distance. Gabriel was either already gone or waiting. Nate hit the rusted side door first, pushing it open slowly, the creak of metal loud enough to set his nerves on edge. The air inside was thick, with dust and old wood, the scent of machine oil lingering from a time long past. He swept his gun across the room, moving deeper, his pulse steady but ready to explode at the first sign of danger. Sarah mirrored his steps, covering his blind spot as they weaved between rusted machinery, the skeletal remains of what was once a booming operation. Then, a sound footsteps above. Nate snapped his aim upward just as a shadow moved along the second-floor walkway. Gabriel, the man they had been chasing, stood near the edge of a rusted catwalk, a pistol at his side, his face hidden in the dim light. "Holloway," Gabriel called out, his voice controlled, but not calm. "You should have stayed out of this." "Didn't get that option." Nate shot back, and closer, his gun steady. "I know about the hit. I know your father wants you dead." Gabriel let out a sharp breath, shifting slightly, but he didn't lower his weapon. "Then you know why you should walk away." "Not happening," Nate said, his eyes locked on Gabriel's trigger finger. "You stole something and now the entire city is bleeding for it. What was it?" Gabriel didn't answer. Instead, he flicked his gaze past Nate toward the door. The moment stretched, too long, too quiet, and then everything erupted. The walls exploded inward as a convoy of black SUVs crashed through the loading dock, headlights slicing through the dust-filled air. Gunfire erupted before the tires had even stopped moving, rounds shredding through the rusted walls as Nate dove behind an overturned machine, Sarah hitting the ground beside him as bullets chewed through the space they had just been standing in. Gabriel moved, fast, disappearing into the upper levels as Vitelli's men poured in, tactical, ruthless, well-trained. Nate returned fire, dropping one of the gun before rolling between the stack of crates. Sarah covered him with tight, controlled shots. The goons spread out, flanking fast. cover as more men stormed inside. Thina roar of an engine. Outside, Ramirez's car slammed through the side gate, tires screeching as he leaned out of the driver's window, his own gun barking as Leo screamed inside. The sudden attack gave Nate the opening he needed, grabbed Sarah's arm, pulling her toward the nearest exit, firing behind him as they sprinted toward the stairs. They had one shot at this get to Gabriel before Vincent's men did, and if they failed, the last Vitelli son was dead before sunrise. The weight of Leo's words hung in the air like a live wire, crackling with danger. The only sound in the car, the rhythmic swipe of the windshield wipers, as Ramirez drove through the rain-slicked streets. Nate stared at Leo, waiting for more, but the younger Vitelli just slumped against the seat, his face pale, hands trembling as he ran them through his sweat-drenched hair. "Say that again," Nate demanded, his voice low, controlled, but carrying the full weight of disbelief. Leo swallowed hard, glancing between Nate and Sarah, then let out a hollow laugh, shaking his head like he still couldn't believe it himself. "My father wants Gabriel dead," he muttered, his voice strained, his eyes darting out the window like he expected a bullet to come through it at any second. "And he's using every piece on the board to make it happen." Nate exhaled sharply, his mind racing. Vincent Vitelli was ruthless, a kingpin who ruled the city's criminal underworld with an iron grip, but putting a hit on his own son. That meant one thing: Gabriel had done something unforgivable. Why? So impressed, watching Leo closely. What did Gabriel do? Leo let out a sharp breath, his knee bouncing with nervous energy. "I don't know the whole picture," he admitted, "but whatever it wasn't small to me. Gabriel stole something. Something big, something that could tear the whole family apart." "Stole what?" Nate snapped. Leo shook his head. "That's what I'm telling you, I don't know. All I know is after it happened, everything changed. My father locked down operations, started cleaning house. The hit list, that was just the beginning. Anyone even remotely close to Gabriel started dropping. Cops, fixers, enforcers, hell, even some of our own guys. If you got near him, you died. No questions." Nate exchanged a glance with Sarah, both of them processing the implications. This wasn't just a power move, this was a purge. Ramirez let out a low whistle from the driver's seat. "So you're telling me the most powerful crime boss in the city is trying to erase his own bloodline, and now we're in the middle of it?" Leo let out another humorless laugh, rubbing his face. "Yeah, well, welcome to the family." Nate leaned in. "Where is he?" Leo flinched, but Nate didn't give him an inch. "You don't get to play dumb, Leo. You were the last name on Varga's list. That means Gabriel was trying to reach you before he died. That means you know something." Leo hesitated, his breath shallow, his fingers drumming anxiously against his knee. Then finally he muttered, "There's a Palatian old distillery down by the docks. It's been abandoned for years, but Gabriel used it sometimes. If he's still in the city, that's where we're going." Nate locked eyes with Sarah, and without a word, Ramirez yanked the wheel, taking a hard turn toward the riverfront. The streets outside blurred, the lights of the city fading as they neared the industrial ruins lining the water's edge. If Gabriel was there, he was running out of time. If Vincent Vitelli wanted his own son dead, he wouldn't leave it to chance. And that meant they weren't the only ones on their way. Nate sprinted up the metal stairs two at a time. Sarah, right behind him, as gunfire tore through the rusted beams around them, sparks raining down like fireflies in the dim light. Below, Vitelli's men were spreading out, moving with precision, clearing corners, cutting off exits. Ramirez's car screeched through the lot outside, his gun flashing as he laid down cover fire, the crack of rounds punching into windshields and steel. Leo was screaming inside the car, but that was the least of Nate's concerns. They had seconds to reach Gabriel before he vanished again, or ended up with a bullet in his head. At the top of the stairs, Nate burst onto the upper catwalk, scanning the rusted walkways for movement. A flash of shadow Gabriel, moving fast, cutting across a row of machinery toward an emergency ladder. "Stop!" Nate bellowed, but Gabriel didn't hesitate, kicked open the window, and launched himself onto the ladder. descending in a controlled slide. Nate didn't think, didn't hesitate. He holstered his gun, ran full speed, and jumped. He caught the railing midair, his body slamming into the side of the ladder with a bone-rattling clang before he started sliding down after Gabriel, metal burning against his palms as he tried to close the gap. Gabriel hit the ground first, rolling to his feet, gun already swinging up, but Nate tackled him before he could fire. They crashed into the pavement, Nate landing hard on top, wrestling for control of the weapon, the cold muzzle pressing against his jaw for a split second before he twisted Gabriel's wrist, forcing the gun away. "Enough!" Nate barked, shoving him against the asphalt, his forearm pressing down against Gabriel's chest. "You want to live? Start talking." But Gabriel wasn't listening. His eyes flicked toward the convoy of SUVs that had just swerved into the lot. The Vitellas worked on. More men poured out, moving with deadly efficiency, fanning out in formation and coordinating. One thing, this was an execution, not a capture. Gabriel coughed, eyes darting wildly as he realized he was out of options. "Get me out of here," he gasped, gripping Nate's jacket. "And I'll tell you everything." That was all Nate needed to hear. He yanked Gabriel up and shoved him toward the nearest cover. Sarah already firing from a nearby stack of crates, keeping the hit squad at bay. Ramirez swung the car around, tires shrieking as Leo ducked low in the back seat, screaming something incoherent. "Get in!" Ramirez roared. Nate didn't wave, Gabriel into the back seat, diving in after him. Sarah barely making it before Ramirez gunned the engine. The first bullet slammed into the trunk, punching through metal, shattering the back windshield as the car rocketed out of the lot. Nate twisted around, firing blindly through the broken glass as the SUV spun to give chase. The Vitellis weren't letting them go. "Lose them," Nate shouted, reloading as Sarah ducked low, cursing under her breath. Ramirez gritted his teeth, gripping the wheel tight as he swerved onto the main road, pushing the car to its limits. The city streaked past in a blur of neon and rain, headlights cutting through the dark as the convoy closed in behind them. Gabriel groaned beside Nate, clutching his side, his breath ragged. "They won't stop," he gasped, barely able to speak. "Not until I'm dead." Nate grabbed him by the collar, shaking him hard. "Then start talking," he growled. "What did you steal?" Gabriel's lips parted, blood trickling from the corner of his mouth. And then, in a voice barely above a whisper, he said, "Proof that my father was working with the feds." Nate's blood ran cold. The Vitellas weren't just hunting their own. Vincent Vitelli was betraying the entire syndicate, and now they were holding the only man who could prove it. Ramirez slammed the gas pedal to the floor, the engine roaring as the car tore through the rain-slicked streets, weaving between traffic while the convoy of black SUVs stayed tight on their tail, their headlights cutting through the night like predatory eyes. Bullets ripped through the rear windshield, glass exploding inward, forcing Nate and Sarah to duck as Gabriel winced, clutching his side where his shirt was damp with blood. "Faster!" Nate barked, turning to fire through the shattered window. Squeezing off 2 quick shots hit the grill of the leading SUV, but it barely slowed them down. These guys weren't just street muscle, they were trained, methodical, and more importantly, they weren't stopping until Gabriel was dead. Ramirez took a hard left, nearly sideswiping the parked car as the tires screamed against the wet pavement. "I'm running out of road here," he growled. Sarah was already moving, yanking her phone from her pocket and swiping fast. "We can't outrun them," she muttered. "We need to disappear. And how the hell do we do that?" Ramirez snapped as another burst of gunfire raked across the side of the car, puncturing the rear tire. The vehicle lurched violently, skidding sideways, but Ramirez wrestled the wheel, keeping it on the road by sheer force of will. "There's a construction site 3 blocks up," Sarah said. "We cut through, lose them in the wreckage." "Do it," Nate ordered, Gabriel's jacket, forcing him to stay conscious. "You don't get to pass out yet." Gabriel groaned, his eyes glassy, but he nodded weakly. They weren't going to make it if this chase lasted much longer. Ramirez swerved hard, taking a shortcut down a narrow alley, side-scraping dumpsters and tearing past terrified pedestrians as the SUVs barely managed to follow, their bigger frames struggling in the tight space. At the end of the alley, Ramirez spinning out. "That's one down," Sarah muttered, twisting to return fire at the two remaining vehicles as they barreled over the debris. Littered ground, bouncing violently over uneven terrain. The half-built skyscraper loomed ahead, a skeletal maze of steel beams and scaffolding. It was their only shot. "Hold on!" Ramirez shouted, and then he floored it. The car launched up a half-finished ramp of gravel and plywood, going airborne for a sickening moment before slamming down onto the exposed second level of the unfinished structure. The impact nearly shattered Nate's teeth, but they made it. The SUVs weren't as lucky as them trying to follow, but clipped the ramp, flipping onto its side and skidding into a stack of steel rods. The last one hesitated, its driver realizing the terrain was too dangerous for pursuit. Instead, the doors flew open, and 4 men jumped out, moving on foot, weapons drawn. "Move," Nate yelled, dragging Gabriel out of the car as Sarah and Ramirez followed, already taking cover behind steel beams as the hit squad opened fire. Bullets ripped through the scaffolding, ricocheting off metal, sending showers of sparks through the dimly lit structure. Nate fired back, dropping one of the men with a clean shot to the shoulder, but the others were advancing fast, using the pillars as cover. Gabriel was barely conscious now, his breath ragged, his weight sagging against Nate's shoulder. They couldn't hold his position. "We get to the top," Sarah said. "There's got to be another way down." "Or a dead end," Ramirez muttered, ducking as a bullet pinged off the main of the side's knee. "We don't have options," Nate snapped, hauling Gabriel forward as they moved up another set of stairs, gunfire chasing them. They were being cornered, and if they didn't find a way out soon, they weren't walking away from this. Nate pushed forward, dragging Gabriel up the skeletal stairs as bullets tore through the scaffolding behind them, the metal groaning under the relentless gunfire. Ramirez and Sarah were covering their backs, their shots echoing through the half-built skyscraper, but their attackers were relentless 3 men moving in formation, cutting off angles, pushing them higher and higher into a trap. The top level was barely more than exposed beams and open air, the wind howling through the unfinished structure, no easy way down. "This is bad," Ramirez grunted, ducking behind a steel column as a burst of automatic fire shredded a stack of wooden pallets beside him. "No cover, no exit. We'll figure it out," Nate said, though he had no idea how. Then everything shifted. The air thickened with something unspoken, something colder than the wind slicing through the metal bones of the building. And then he stepped out of the shadows. A Manat, just any man. Tall, broad-shouldered, dressed in a dark overcoat, with gloves so pristine it looked like he never touched anything dirty. His presence alone sent a ripple through the chaos, the gunman freezing, even Sarah hesitating mid-reload. They knew who he was. Never met him before, but he didn't have to. Dominic Caruso. The name alone was enough to make hardened killers rethink their career choices. He wasn't just a hitter, he was a fixer, a cleaner, a man whose mere presence meant the situation had spiraled beyond normal violence and into something worse. A thin smile curled on Caruso's lips as he adjusted his cuffs, his cold blue eyes sweeping across the scene before settling on Gabriel, who was barely standing now, blood dripping between his fingers. "Vincent is very disappointed in you, Gabriel," Caruso said, his voice smooth, practiced, the kind of voice that belonged to men who never raised it, because they never had to. Gabriel barely lifted his head. "Screw you," he muttered. Caruso sighed, as if disappointed, before shifting his attention to Nate. "Detective Holloway," he said, tilting his head slightly. "I've heard about you. You have a habit of getting in the way. It's a gift." Nate shot back, gripping his gun tighter. Caruso chuckled, nodding slightly. "I like you, which is why I'm offering you a choice." He gestured at Gabriel. "Step aside. Let me take him. Walk away, and I won't have to kill you." The wind howled between them, the space between words stretching thin. Nate knew the offer wasn't a bluff. Caruso didn't make empty threats. If they fought, they were all dead. But if they handed Gabriel over, everything they had been running for was gone. Nate glanced at Sarah, at Ramirez, at Gabriel. Gabriel, whose eyes held something else now, not fear, determination. He was hiding something, Something more than just his father's betrayal. Nate's gut told him this was it. The moment that changed everything. So, he made his choice. He raised his gun. Come and take him. Caruso's smile didn't fade, but his eyes did something worse. They darkened. He sighed, almost regretful. Then, with a flick of his wrist, his men opened fire. The air erupted in gunfire, the muzzle flashes lighting up the skeletal framework of the unfinished skyscraper as bullets ripped through steel and concrete, shattering glass, ricocheting off roofs, filling the night with a deafening storm of destruction. Nate dove sideways, dragging Gabriel down behind a stack of wooden planks as Sarah and Ramirez fired back, their rounds forcing Caruso's men to take cover behind exposed girders. This was a losing fight. They were outnumbered, outgunned, and pinned down with nowhere left to run. Caruso moved with the predator's patience, walking through the gunfire like it didn't apply to him, his long coat billowing in the wind as he stepped behind a steel column, his voice cutting through the chaos. "I tried to be civil, Detective," he called out, his tone still irritatingly calm. "But now you've left me no choice." He gave a small note and suddenly, the gunfire stopped. Silence. Nate's breath slowed, his pulse hammering in his ears as he scanned the open levels of the building. Something wasn't right. Ramirez muttered, "What the hell are they doing?" Then, Nate saw it movement from below. More shadows emerging from the stairwells. More men, climbing up the framework like phantoms, circling them. They weren't shooting because they didn't have to. They were closing in. "We're boxed in," Sarah muttered, tightening her grip on her weapon. Gabriel coughed, struggling to keep himself upright. "You should have let me die," he rasped. "Not an option." Nate shot back, scanning for anything they could use. And then an idea. His eyes locked onto the crane. The massive industrial crane towering above the site, its long arm extending out past the building, its operator cab just barely within reach. It was risky insane, really, but it was their only shot. He turned to Ramirez. "How good are you at hot wiring construction equipment?" Ramirez blinked. "You're serious?" "Deadly." Ramirez hesitated for half a second before nodding. "Cover me." He broke into a sprint, dodging behind steel beams as bullets erupted again. Caruso's men realizing what was happening. Sarah laid down covering fire, blowing out the kneecap of the nearest gunman, sending him screaming off the edge of the scaffolding. Nate hoisted Gabriel up, practically dragging him toward the ledge where the crane's base connected to the platform. They just had to hold out a few more seconds. Ramirez vaulted into the cab, smashing the glass with his elbow before yanking out wires, working fast as gunfire melted the metal shell. "Hurry up, Ramirez," Sarah snapped, taking out another attacker before ducking back behind cover. Ramirez cursed under his breath. Then the crane's motor roared to life. The long arm swung out, its thick cable hanging just over the ledge, swaying slightly from the movement. That was their exit. "Go." Nate pushed Gabriel forward, gripping the cable first, wrapping it tight around his arm before leaping off the edge. The weight jerked his shoulder hard, his legs swinging over the drop as he slid down fast, the wind roaring past him. Gabriel followed, barely conscious, barely gripping, but holding on. Sarah was next, gripping tight, kicking off the wall as bullets streaked past her. Ramirez leaped last, just as Caruso stepped into view, raising his gun, but he was too late. They were gone, swinging out into the open air, escaping into the night, leaving Caruso standing alone on the ledge, his expression unreadable, watching them disappear into the city below. The wind howled as they swung out over the city, the neon skyline stretching beneath them, the crane's thick steel cable their only lifeline, as they hurtled downward, momentum threatening to rip their grip free. Nate held on with everything he had, his shoulder burning, the tension in the line vibrating through his bones as Gabriel dangled beside him, barely conscious, his fingers slipping. "Hold on," Nate snarled, reaching out, snatching Gabriel's wrist just as he lost his grip, his dead weight yanking them both downward in a sickening run. Below them, the construction elevator loomed, a rusted metal platform suspended 10 stories above the pavement, their only chance to land without shattering every bone in their bodies. Ramirez and Sarah were swinging just behind them, timing their descent, every second a countdown to their survival. for a 30-story freefall. "Brace!" Nate barked, releasing the cable at the last possible second. Twisting midair as he and Gabriel crashed onto the platform, the impact rattling their spines, metal groaning under the sudden force. Ramirez hit next, rolling with the fall, his breath exploding out of his chest, followed by Sarah, who barely landed before the cable snapped free, whipping wildly before slamming into the scaffolding with a deafening crash. They had seconds to breathe before a new sound cut through the chaos-screeching tires below. The Vitelli convoy wasn't done. SUVs swarmed to the base of the building, men already piling out, weapons drawn, spreading out like wolves circling wounded prey. "They're still coming," Ramirez gasped, staggering to his feet, gripping the rusted control panel beside him. "What's the play?" Nate's mind raced. They were trapped on an exposed elevator platform, nowhere to go but down. But if they moved now, they'd be gunned down before their feet hit the ground. Then, a new set of headlights cut through the dark. Not SUVs, motorcycles. 3 of them, engines snarling as they slid into position near the convoy, their riders clad in dark gear, helmets concealing their faces. The Vitelli gunmen paused, their focus shifting. "Who the hell?" Ramirez started, but before he could finish, the lead rider pulled a sawed-off shotgun from his back, spun it one-handed, and fired. The blast ripped through the night, dropping one of the enforcers instantly. The other 2 riders followed, precision gunfire cutting down 2 more before the rest even had time to react. "Who the hell are these guys?" Sarah shouted, already reaching for her gun, but Nate just stared, recognition slamming into him like a freight train. He knew that lead rider, even under the helmet, even through the chaos shooting. The rider moved up, their visor catching the glow of the street lamp. With a flick of the wrist, they pulled off the helmet, revealing a sharp, angry face, a scar slicing down one cheek. Dark eyes locked onto Nate, Cass Winters, his old partner. A woman he hadn't seen in 3 years, a woman he had watched die. "Get in," she called, tossing him an extra helmet, her voice just as sharp as he remembered. "Unless you feel like dying tonight." Nate didn't hesitate. He grabbed Gabriel, threw him onto the back of the second bike, then climbed on behind Cass, his mind still catching up, still reeling from the impossible reality of her standing in front of him. But the gunfire was already restarting. Vitelli's men weren't letting them go without a fight. Cass gunned the engine, the bike roaring to life beneath them. "Hold on," she warned. Then they were gone, blasting into the night, bullets slicing through the air behind them, leaving nothing but chaos in their wake. The engine howled as the motorcycles tore through the streets, tires screeching against the wet pavement while gunfire roared behind them, bullets punching into parked cars and storefront windows, sending shattered glass raining over the asphalt. Nate tightened his grip on Cass's waist as she leaned the bike into a sharp turn, the world tilting at a sickening angle before the tires caught, propelling them forward at breakneck speed. Ramirez and Sarah followed close behind on their own bike, Gabriel barely holding on as his weakened body sagged against Ramirez's back. The Vitelli convoy wasn't giving up, SUVs weaving through traffic, their gunmen leaning out of windows, unloading bursts of automatic fire that sent pedestrians diving for cover. Nate twisted, drawing his pistol, aiming one-handed as Cass accelerated between 2 speeding cabs. He squeezed the trigger twice, his first shot punching through a windshield, sending the driver veering into a parked truck in a shower of sparks and twisted metal. The second shot clipped a gunman's shoulder, sending him reeling as his rifle clattered into the road. The remaining SUVs surged forward, their engines growling, closing the distance fast. Cass yanked the handlebars, cutting down a narrow alley barely wider than the bike itself, the walls flashing past in a blur of graffiti and rusted fire escapes. One of the SUVs tried to follow but slammed into a dumpster, flipping onto its side in a screech of tortured metal. Nate glanced back, catching Ramirez's bike, clearing the alley just in time, before another burst of gunfire shattered the brick wall beside them. Cass didn't slow, launching out of the alley at full speed, the bike fishtailing into an overpass that curved above the river. The remaining SUV was still behind them, its headlights blinding, the gunman on the roof bracing against the wind as he leveled a shotgun. Nate barely had time to Nate nearly losing his grip as they skidded toward the guardrail. The gunman racked another shell, taking aim for a final shot. Nate twisted, lifting his gun as the SUV surged forward, the gunman's finger tightening on the trigger. The shot rang out, but it wasn't his. Ramirez fired first, his bullet slicing through the gunman's skull, sending him tumbling off the roof, his body slamming onto the hood before rolling off onto the pavement. The SUV swerved violently, the driver losing control. Cass gunned the engine, and in one fluid motion, she cut the bike sideways, sending them into a controlled slide. The SUV roared past them, its tires screaming as it slammed full speed into the guardrail. The metal crumpled under the impact before the entire vehicle flipped, rolling twice before bursting into flames and plummeting off the overpass, crashing into the river below. The explosion lit up the night sky, casting flickering shadows over the city as the wreckage disappeared beneath the dark waves. The roar of the blast faded, leaving only the distant wail of sirens in the background. Cass straightened the bike, breathing hard, her hands still steady on the handlebars as she glanced at Nate through the rearview mirror. He exhaled sharply, lowering his gun, feeling the tension in his chest ease for the first time in what felt like hours. Ramirez and Sarah pulled up beside them. Gabriel slumped against Ramirez, barely conscious, but still alive. Cass smirked, shaking her head slightly. "Same old Holloway," she muttered before revving the engine again. "Now let's get the hell out of here before we show up." Nate didn't argue. He just held on as they disappeared into the night, leaving the burning wreckage behind them. The city lights blurred into streaks of neon and shadow as the motorcycles sped through back streets, cutting across alleyways and weaving between cars. Every movement calculated, every second another opportunity for survival or death. Cass led the way, her posture rigid, her grip firm on the handlebars as she pushed the bike faster, taking them deeper into the industrial side of the city where the roads were cracked, the warehouses abandoned, the air thick with the scent of oil and rust. Ramirez and Sarah stayed close, their engine a steady growl behind them, Gabriel barely conscious, but still gripping Ramirez's waist with whatever strength he had left. Nate kept his focus sharp, his mind racing to process the impossible Cass Winters, alive, after 3 years of believing she was dead, after watching her disappear in an ambush that should have been the end of her. He had no time for questions, no space for disbelief, not when the battalions were still hunting them, not when they were bleeding out leads faster than they could chase them. Cass pulled off the main road, cutting through a gap in the rusted chain link fence, the bikes roaring down a gravel path toward a dilapidated auto shop at the edge of the city. She slowed, rolling into the shadows of the building, killing the engine as she coasted into a garage with a half-open door, her head swiveling once before she gave a short nod. Safe, for now. Nate slid off the bike, his muscles aching, his pulse still hammering in his ears as Ramirez and Sarah pulled in behind them, kicking up dust as their tires crunched against the gravel. Gabriel nearly collapsed the second Ramirez let go, his legs buckling, his breath shallow. Sarah caught him, hauling him toward an old workbench, lowering him onto a stool, while Ramirez locked the garage door behind him. Cass peeled off her helmet, shaking out her short dark hair, her sharp eyes flicking between them before finally settling on Nate. "You look like hell," she muttered, grabbing a rag from the workbench and wiping the rain from her face. "You're supposed to be dead," Nate shot back, watching her carefully, searching for something in explanation, a tell, anything that made sense of what was happening. Cass smirked, tossing the rag aside. "Yeah, well, so were you," she said, jerking a thumb toward the wreckage of their night. "Looks like we're both bad at staying buried." Ramirez let out his head as he leaned against the wall. "I hate to break up this little reunion, but someone better start explaining fast, because I'm running out of patience and bullets." Cass ignored him, stepping toward Gabriel, tilting her head as she studied him. "So, this is the guy," she mused, crossing her arms. "The golden sun. The reason the whole damn city is trying to kill you." Gabriel groaned, barely lifting his head. "Nice to meet you, too," he muttered, his voice hoarse. Cass glanced at Nate. "Tell me you didn't get into all this just to save some pop rat." Nate's jaw tightened. "He has exhaling through her nose. "Then you're already dead," she said flatly. "You just haven't figured it out yet." Gabriel managed a weak chuckle, blood smeared at the corner of his mouth. "Yeah, I kind of got that part," he rasped. Cass looked back at Nate. "You got a plan?" Nate exhaled, running a hand through his damp hair. "We find out what Gabriel has, get it into the right hands, and we take Vincent down before he buries us." Cass let out a short laugh, shaking her head. "That's cute. Like the Vitellis are just going to let you walk into the sunset." She stepped closer, lowering her voice. "Listen, Holloway, you don't take down guys like Vincent. You disappear. You run. Or you end up another name on a list. Not an option," Nate said, his tone like steel. "Then you're going to need more than luck," Cass muttered, glancing toward the garage door, her voice carrying the weight of experience. "Because I guarantee you he already knows where you are." The second the words left her mouth, the sound of screeching tires echoed outside. A second later, the first bullet tore through the garage door. The garage erupted in gunfire, bullets ripping through the rusted metal, sparks flashing like lightning in the dim light as everyone dived for cover. Nate hit the ground behind a stack of old tires, Ramirez cursing as he yanked Gabriel down behind a rusted workbench, Sarah flipping a tool cart onto its side for makeshift protection. Cass moved like she'd been expecting this, rolling to a crate and pulling a pistol from the boot, her eyes sharp, her breathing steady. The garage door buckled as the first enforcer tried to force it open, but Cass was already moving. She popped up, fired twice, the first shot shattering the glass on the door's small window, the second dropping the man on the other side with a scream. "We're boxed in," Ramirez yelled, returning fire as shadows moved outside, dark figures circling the building, cutting off every exit. More rounds slammed into the concrete, kicking up dust, the scent of oil and gunpowder thick in the air. Nate cursed, scanning for an escape. The back door was already jammed shut with old equipment. The only way out was through the firestorm. A shape moved past the window Vitelli's men were coming in. "They're pushing left," Sarah shouted, reloading as she fired blind through the smoke. The gun fluttered for a half-second long enough for Nate to make a move. He vaulted over the workbench, grabbed a wrench, and hurled it toward the wall where an old fuel drum sat forgotten in the corner. The impact tipped it over, spilling gasoline across the floor, right toward the incoming gunman. Cass saw it at the same time he did. "You always were reckless," she muttered before aiming at the puddle and pulling the trigger. The gunshot ignited the fuel instantly. Wave of fire surged across the entrance, forcing the enforcers back, their screams barely audible over the roaring flames. The distraction was all they needed. "Now!" Nate shouted, grabbing Gabriel and hauling him toward the rear storage room, Ramirez and Sarah covering them as Cass kicked open a back window. "We're climbing," she ordered, already pulling herself up onto the ledge. Outside, more headlights cut through the dark, another convoy arriving. More men, more death on its way. Nate shoved Gabriel up, boosting him through the window, his body weak, but still moving. Sarah followed, then Ramirez. Cass gave one last look at the burning garage, her lips curving into a satisfied smirk before she jumped out last. The second they hit the alley, bullets started flying again. They ran, sprinting through the narrow streets, their breath ragged, pounding pavement as tires screeched behind them. This wasn't a battle anymore. This was survival. And Nate knew, deep in his bones, they were running out of places to hide. Nate sprinted through the alley, dragging Gabriel with him as bullets shredded the air behind them, sparks exploding off the brick walls, the roar of engines growing closer as Vitelli's men swarmed the streets. Sarah and Ramirez were just ahead, Cass covering their rear, her pistol barking in controlled bursts, dropping one of the enforcers as he rounded the corner too fast. "Move, move," she barked, and Nate didn't need to be told twice. Gabriel stumbled, his body failing, his breath coming in ragged gasps, but Nate refused to let him fall. The alley opened into an intersection, the streetlights flickering, the asphalt slick with rain, and Nate knew the second they stepped into the open, they were dead. A black SUV swerved onto the block, headlights blinding, its tires screaming as it fishtailed toward them, gunmen already leaning out the windows. "Down!" Ramirez bellowed, grabbing Gabriel and yanking him behind a row of dumpsters, just as the first burst of automatic fire shredded the pavement. Nate rolled behind a car, popping up just long enough to squeeze off 2 shots, both rounds slamming into the SUV's windshield, spiderwebbing the glass but not stopping the damn thing. The doors burst open, more men pouring out, rifles up, moving with precision, not street thugs, professionals. Cass cursed, taking cover behind a fire escape. They brought the 18. "We're not going to win this fight," Sarah panted, slamming a fresh manual pistol. "We need a way out. We're boxed in," Ramirez snapped. "Only way out is through them." Nate scanned the street, his mind racing. They needed a distraction, something to shift the odds, something his eyes locked onto an abandoned delivery truck, idling on the curb. Driver's side door still open, keys still in the ignition. "Perfect. Cover me," he growled, and before anyone could argue, he bolted. Gunfire exploded around him, rounds ripping through the air, clipping the side mirror as he dove into the cab, yanking the door shut as bullets pounded against the metal. He twisted the key, the engine roared to life, and without hesitation, he slammed his foot on the gas. The truck lurched forward, tires screeching, the full weight of the vehicle barreling straight into the nearest SUV, crushing the front end in a violent crunch. Bodies scattered, men diving out of the way, their formation breaking apart. Nate didn't slow down, he yanked the wheel, skidding the truck sideways, blocking the alley entrance completely. "Now!" he shouted, throwing the door open, jumping out mid-roll as Sarah, Ramirez, Cass, and Gabriel sprinted past him, using the few seconds of chaos to push forward. More gunfire erupted, but it was disorganized now, scattered. They had their opening. Cass grabbed Nate's arm, pulling him forward, her breath hot against his ear. "Hope you got another trick up your sleeve," she muttered, "because they're not going to stop." Nate wiped the blood from his temple, staring ahead as they disappeared into the dark streets, the echoes of the firefight still ringing in his ears. "Then we don't stop either," he muttered, jaw tight. Because this wasn't just a chase anymore. This was war. The city whirled past in a haze of neon and rain as Nate led the group through the labyrinth of side streets, their breath heavy, their bodies running on nothing but adrenaline and survival instinct. Gabriel was barely conscious, each step a struggle, his weight slowing him down. But stopping wasn't an option, not with Vitelli's men, hunting them like wolves. Ramirez had taken the hunt, eyes scanning for an escape route. Sarah covering their rear, while Cass moved like a ghost, her senses sharp, her pistol gripped tight, as if expecting an ambush at any second. The rain pounded against the pavement, washing away the blood and gunpowder stench, but it did nothing to mask the low, distant rumble of engines. Vitelli's men were still out there, still tracking them, still closing in. They reached an underpass, the concrete structure looming overhead, a maze of graffiti tag support beams and abandoned vehicles, the air thick with the stench of damp asphalt and exhaust. Nate slowed, scanning their surroundings, his instincts prickling something felt off. "We need to keep moving," Ramirez muttered, but Nate held up a hand, his ears straining against the rain. Then he heard it, a click, a mechanical, deliberate click. His stomach plummeted. "Trap," he shouted, just as the first spotlight blazed to life, cutting through the dark, blinding them. The roar of engines erupted from both sides of the underpass, black SUVs skidding to a stop, doors flying open, gunmen pouring out, their weapons already raised. They had been waiting for them, boxing them in. Ramirez swore under his breath. Sarah jerked Gabriel behind cover, and Cass's expression barely flickered as she tightened her grip on her gun. From the lead SUV, a figure emerged, stepping slowly into the light. Not Caruso, not just another enforcer, Vincent Vitelli himself. His tailored coat barely shifted in the wind, his slicked-back silver hair untouched by the rain, his sharp, calculating eyes scanned the group like a chessboard, already 3 moves ahead. He exhaled slowly, as if disappointed, as if the outcome had already been decided. "Detective Holloway," he said, Vincent tilted his head slightly, his gaze flicking to Gabriel, who was slumped against the concrete barrier, barely holding on. "And you," Vincent continued, his voice dipping into something colder. "You had every opportunity to disappear, yet here you are, dragging your failure through the mud, bringing shame to our name." Gabriel forced himself upright, his breath ragged, but his eyes defiant. Better than selling out to the feds. The tension snapped like a live wire. The enforcers raised their weapons. Ramirez cursed. Sarah braced. Cass's muscles coiled like a spring. Nate had exactly 1 second to make a decision. 1 second before everything erupted. So he did the only thing that made sense. He shot first. His bullet punched through the floodlight, shattering the blinding beam into shards of glass and sparks, plunging half the underpass back into darkness. Chaos exploded in an instant. Gunfire erupted from all sides, rounds slamming into concrete, sparking off metal beams, shredding the air with deafening violence. Nate lunged for Gabriel, dragging him behind an abandoned sedan, as bullets tore through the windshield, the enforcers closing in from both flanks. Ramirez and Sarah were already firing back, dropping one too, but there were too many. Cass moved like a shadow, rolling behind cover, snapping off precise shots, each bullet finding its mark, but even she couldn't hold them off forever. Vincent never flinched. He simply watched, his eyes cold, unreadable as his men advanced. He wasn't here for a battle, he was here for an execution, and if Nate didn't think of something fast, that's exactly how this night would end. Gunfire ripped through the underpass, bullets slamming into concrete, ricocheting off steel beams, shattering glass in a storm of destruction. Nate kept Gabriel pressed against the rusted sedan, his own gun barking in quick, controlled bursts, each shot aimed at the advancing enforcers, but there were too many too precise, too coordinated. Ramirez was crouched behind a toppled dumpster, laying down, covering fire, his shots punching through the darkness, while Sarah reloaded fast, ducking low as rounds chewed through the concrete behind her. Cass moved like a phantom, slipping between shadows, flanking left, her pistol kicking with deadly precision, dropping a gunman before vanishing into the maze of pillars. But it wasn't enough. They were surrounded. Vincent Vitelli stood untouched behind his advancing men, his face unreadable, his eyes calm, calculating, waiting. He didn't need to lift a weapon. His men would finish this for him. "Nate!" Ramirez shouted over the chaos. "We gotta move." Move where? The exits were cut off. The alley behind them was blocked by SUVs, and the river beneath the bridge was a death sentence from this height. Nowhere to run, nowhere except up. Nate's eyes snapped to the overpass beams above, where an old maintenance ladder hung loose, rusted but still intact. He grabbed Gabriel, dragging him to his feet, ignoring the blood, ignoring the weight. "We're going up." Sarah and Ramirez caught on instantly, Sarah firing high, aiming at the exposed streetlights overhead, plunging half the underpass into flickering darkness. The gunfire hesitated. That was all needed. Cass broke first. She sprinted toward the ladder, vaulting over a fallen gunman, leaping onto the rungs, climbing fast. Nate pushed Gabriel next, forcing him to grab hold, his arms shaking, his body barely holding up, but he climbed. Ramirez covered them, emptying his clip, then turned and followed. Sarah was right behind, and then Nate felt it. A presence, too close, too fast. He spun. Vincent was there. No gun, no hesitation, just a knife. It came fast, a blur of steel cutting through the air, aimed straight for Nate's throat. He barely dodged, twisting left, catching Vincent's wrist, the blade slicing inches from his skin. But Vincent was strong, terrifyingly controlled, his free hand slamming into Nate's ribs, knocking the breath from his lungs. The knife turned, angling toward his gut. Nate blocked. A violent struggle, blade flashing, fists landing, bones bruising. Vincent was relentless, his movements precise, his footwork perfect. He wasn't just a Bosch, was a killer. Nate was losing. A quick shove the knife almost found its mark. Vincent's grip like a vice, his weight pressing forward, driving Nate toward the edge of the overpass. A drop too far to survive. Vincent smiled. He knew he had won. Nate did the only thing left. He grabbed Vincent's wrist with both hands and pulled. The force sent them both stumbling, off balance, into the open air. For a split second, Vincent's expression shifted shock, rage, realization. Then they fell. Nate twisted midair, turning Vincent's body beneath his, and crashed straight onto the roof of a waiting SUV. The impact exploded through his bones, metal crunching, glass shattering, pain detonating in his ribs as the world spun. He barely stayed conscious, barely registered Vincent's motionless form beside him. But he was alive. Somewhere above, Cass's voice rang out. "Nate, get up!" The fight wasn't over, and if he didn't move now, he never would. Pain ran through Nate's body as he sucked in a breath, his ribs screaming from the impact, his vision blurred by the shattered glass, and rain streaking down his face. The world tilted, sirens howling in the distance, tires screeching as the remaining SUVs scrambled, their drivers thrown into chaos at the sight of their boss lying motionless beside him. Vincent Vitelli wasn't moving, his body twisted awkwardly on the caved-in roof, blood trickling from his temple. Dead? Unconscious? Nate didn't have time to check. Above him, Cass was shouting, her voice cutting through the storm, but the ringing in his ears made it nothing more than a distant echo. He forced himself to move, rolling off the wrecked SUV just as a gunman spun the corner, rifle raised, muzzle flashing. Nate hit the pavement hard, the bullet barely missing his shoulder, sending sparks flying off the metal beside him. He rolled onto one knee, his hands slipping on the wet asphalt, his pulse hammering. The enforcer advanced, weapon locked on, steady, ready to finish the job. And then Cass dropped from above, landing like a specter of death, her blade flashing once clean, fast, precise. The gunman choked, his body locking as the knife sliced clean through his throat. He collapsed before he could even fire another shot. Cass yanked the blade free, her expression unreadable as she grabbed Nate's arm and hauled him up. "You alive?" she muttered. Nate coughed, wincing, nodding. No time for pain, no time for questions, just survival. More gunfire erupted from the other side of the underpass as Sarah and Ramirez laid down cover, bullets cutting through the fog of smoke and rain. Gabriel was still climbing, struggling, but making with his survival instinct the only thing keeping him moving. Cass yanked Nate forward, dragging him toward the nearest ladder. Medina, Logan, Vincent, still alive. Nate turned, breathing hard, watching as the mob boss stirred, his fingers twitching, his eyes fluttering open. Their gazes met, and for a split second, Nate saw something wrong. Rage, hate, but not defeat. Vincent's hand moved toward his coat, reaching for something. A gun. One last play. Number. Not this time. Nate kicked forward, boot slamming into Vincent's wrist, sending the gun skidding across the pavement. Vincent snarled, trying to lunge, but Nate grabbed him by the collar, hauling him halfway off the wreckage, forcing him to look up, forcing him to understand. "It's over," Nate growled, breath ragged. "We don't run this city anymore." Vincent spat blood, his voice nothing but a rasp. "You think you're a hero, Holloway? You think this changes anything?" Nate's grip tightened. "I think you just lost." Vincent let out a broken chuckle, shaking his head. "You have no idea who you're dealing with." The sirens were getting closer. The whole damn city was about to descend on this spot. Vincent was out of time, and Nate was out of patience. He released him, stepping back, watching as the man who had ruled the underworld for decades lay broken and powerless beneath him. Cass grabbed Nate's wrist, snapping him back to reality. "We need to go." No hesitation, no looking back. Nate turned and ran up the ladder, onto the overpass, where Ramirez was already yanking Gabriel into the getaway car. Sarah was behind the wheel, her expression tense, ready. Cass threw herself in next, Nate slamming the door behind him as the tires screeched, the car launching forward just as the first squad cars roared onto the scene. Red and blue lights flashed in the mirrors. Sirens, cops, chaos. And behind them, Vincent Vitelli, finally beaten, finally caught. But something in Nate's gut told him this wasn't the end. Nate knew it wouldn't last. They weren't free yet. Ramirez checked the rearview mirror, his fingers tight around his gun as Gabriel slumped against the seat, barely holding on, his breathing ragged. "Where are we going?" Ramirez barked, his voice edged with adrenaline. Cass leaned forward, eyes scanning the road ahead, her expression unreadable. "We need to disappear." "No," Nate cut in, jaw tight. "We need to finish this." Cass let out a sharp laugh, shaking her head. "You are insane." "Maybe," Nate muttered, turning to Gabriel. "You said you had proof. Where is it?" Gabriel groaned, forcing his head up, his face pale and streaked with sweat. "Safe deposit box." Midtown. "But it's not his documents." He swallowed hard, his body trembling. "It's video, wiretaps, everything." Nate's blood ran cold. If that was true, it wasn't just a hit list anymore. It was a war. Ramirez exhaled sharply. "So, let me get this straight. You've been sitting on something that could take down the biggest crime syndicate in the city, and you just now mention it?" Gabriel coughed, a weak smirk playing on his lips. "Didn't think I'd live long enough for it to matter." Sarah took a hard turn, cutting through an empty intersection, the tires screeching against the wet asphalt. "If we go for that box, they'll be waiting." "And we don't go through the front," Nate said, already forming a plan in his head. "We need a diversion." Cass arched an eyebrow. "And who exactly is dumb enough to pull that off?" Nate didn't hesitate. "I know a guy." Ramirez let out a long breath. This just keeps getting better. The safe deposit box was their only shot, but getting to it would mean walking straight into the lion's den. And if the Vitellis were still out there, still hunting, they weren't going to let Gabriel walk away alive. They had one chance, one shot to end this before it consumed them all. Nate reached for his phone, dialing fast. Time to call in a favor. The plan barely had time to form before everything went to hell. The moment Nate's call went through, Sarah jerked the wheel hard, narrowly avoiding a black sedan that came out of nowhere, slamming through an intersection at full speed. The impact missed them by inches, but another car wasn't so lucky T-boned by the hit squad meant for them. Metal twisting, glass exploding, bodies flying. Tires screamed, the smell of burnt rubber thick in the air as Sarah fought the wheel, keeping them on the road. "They found us," Ramirez shouted, already rolling down his window, gun ready. Late. The second sedan came up from behind, ramming them hard, sending their car skidding sideways. Nate braced himself, throwing an arm over Gabriel to keep him from smashing into the door. More headlights flared behind them, 2 more SUVs. This wasn't just a hit team, it was an execution squad. Cass kicked her door open before the car even fully stopped, rolling into the street as bullets punched through the side panels, ripping the interior apart. Ramirez fired back, shattering the windshield of the nearest SUV, but they kept coming, relentless. "We need to move," Nate growled, yanking Gabriel out as Sarah kicked open the driver's side door, laying down cover fire. They scrambled toward the alley beside them, gunfire shredding the pavement at their heels. Cass moved first, quick, precise, ducking behind an abandoned bus stop, her pistol spitting death as she dropped the first gunman to step out of the SUV. Nate dragged Gabriel, his mind racing. They weren't making it out of this without him. He grabbed his phone, dialing fast as they rounded the corner into the alley, bullets cutting through the trash bins beside them. "Pick up, damn it," Nate growled. The line clicked. A voice, calm, steady, with just a hint of amusement. "This better be worth it." Nate didn't hesitate. "We're pinned, 5 blocks from Midtown. 2 SUVs, a black sedan. Vitelli's men." A pause. Then, just 3 words. "Give me 10. The line went dead. Nate didn't have time to explain. "We hold this alley," he ordered, shoving Gabriel behind cover, his own gun raised as more hitmen swarmed in. Sarah popped out from behind a dumpster, her gunfire echoing between the brick walls, taking down another shooter before ducking back. They were outnumbered, outgunned, and running out of time. Ramirez reloaded, jaw clenched. "Hope your guy's fast," because if he wasn't, they weren't going to last 10 minutes. The alley erupted in gunfire, bullets ripping through trash bins, splintering brick, sending shattered glass raining onto the wet pavement. Nate ducked behind a rusted dumpster, snapping off 2 shots, one punching through the chest of a gunman trying to flank, the other slamming into the leg of another who collapsed with a scream. But more were coming. Ramirez was crouched behind a stack of wooden pallets, firing in controlled bursts, keeping their attackers pinned. But it wasn't enough. They were closing in. Cass, ever the ghost, had already moved to higher ground, scaling a fire escape like she was born to it, her pistol barking down at the advancing enforcers. Sarah was beside Nate, blood trickling from a graze on her arm, her jaw tight as she reloaded. Gabriel was the only one not fighting, barely conscious, his breathing shallow, every movement slow. They were running out of time. The first SUV screeched to a stop at the alley entrance, doors bursting open, more men pouring out, automatic weapons gleaming under the dim streetlights. Nate clenched his jaw. If their backup didn't show in the next minute, they were dead. "We can't hold this," Ramirez shouted over the chaos, ducking as another spray of gunfire ripped through the alley wall behind him. "We don't have a choice," Nate growled back, turning and unloading his last few rounds at the advancing hitman. He dropped one, flipped another, but his gun clicked empty. A grim silence fell over the alley, their enemies realizing the shift, the slow satisfaction creeping into their movements. A gunman stepped forward, weapon raised, grin already forming, and then the bullet exploded. The first blast ripped through the night, a thunderous shockwave that sent bodies flying, flames bursting outward as the lead SUV was reduced to a fireball of twisted metal. The second explosion came seconds later, another vehicle detonating in a flash of orange heat, raining debris across the alley. The remaining gunmen froze, disoriented, confused. And that's when the real massacre began. A black muscle car roared in from the side street, its tires screaming, its headlights slamming through the smoke. From the driver's window, a shotgun appeared on blast. 2, 3, each shot tearing through the stunned enforcers before they even had a chance to react. The car skidded to a stop, the driver's door swinging open, and there he was. A towering figure, a long coat whipping in the wind, his face shadowed under the flickering light of the burning wreckage. Reese, gravedigger, Carter, the kind of man who didn't just take out problems, she buried them. "You look like hell," Reese muttered, pumping the shotgun before resting on his shoulder. "Took your time," Nate shot back, already moving. The survivors from the ambush were scrambling now, disoriented, breaking formation. Reese lifted his shotgun, fired once more, dropping the last of them with a brutal efficiency that made it clear this wasn't a fight anymore. It was a slaughter. The alley went silent. Nothing but the crackle of flames, the hiss of leaking gas, the distant wail of sirens. It was over, for now. Reese turned to Nate, eyes sharp. "Where's the package?" Nate gestured to Gabriel, barely holding on. Reese sighed, shaking his head. "You owe me for this, Holloway." "Put it on my tab," Nate muttered. Reese smirked, tossing him a fresh magazine. "Now let's get the hell out of here before more of them show up." They weren't safe yet, and the real fight was still ahead. Reese threw the car into gear, the engine roaring like a caged animal as they sped out of the alley, leaving behind the burning wreckage, the bodies, the smell of gunpowder and scorched metal. Nate sat in the front, reloading his pistol with the fresh magazine Reese had tossed him, his mind still racing, still wired from the fight. Ramirez and Sarah were crammed into the back, keeping Gabriel upright, the younger Vitelli barely holding on, his breath shallow, his face slick with sweat. Cass sat beside them, watching the road with the same cold calculation that never left her. "Where's the deposit box?" Reese asked, swerving between traffic, ignoring red lights, keeping his foot heavy on the gas. "Midtown," Gabriel murmured, his voice weak. "Security bank, 3rd floor." Reese let out a short, humorless chuckle. "So we're walking straight into a federal monitored financial institution with the entire Vitelli syndicate gunning for us. Fantastic. It's the only shot we've got," he muttered, checking the clip in his gun before snapping it back into place. "That deposit box has everything. Recordings, wiretaps, men there. He would be soon. They were in a race against death, and the finish line was closing fast. Reese took a hard turn, the tires screeching as they hit an open stretch of road, the city lights blurring past. Nate checked the rearview mirror, no tails, no pursuit. But that didn't mean they were clear. The telly still had resources. "We need a plan," Ramirez muttered, adjusting his grip on Gabriel, who looked worse by the second. A way in, a way out. That bank's got security cameras, guards, the works. We can't just walk in. We don't have time for subtle, Nate said, exhaling sharply. We go in fast. We get the box. We get out before they know we're there. Sarah shook her head. "That's not a plan. That's suicide. Welcome to the job," Cass muttered. The car fell into tense silence, the weight of what was coming pressing down on them. This was it. The moment they got their hands on that box, everything changed. No more running, no more hiding. This was the end game. Reese turned onto a side street, slowing just enough to take a sharp right onto an underground parking ramp beneath an old high-rise. He killed the engine, looking at Nate. "We do this. There's no turning back." Nate stared ahead at the dimly lit structure of the bank, just a block away, the neon glow of Midtown reflecting off the red pavement. He tightened his grip on his gun. No turning back. Let's finish this. The air inside the parking garage was thick with tension as Nate and the others climbed out of the car, the distant hum of city traffic echoing off the concrete walls. This was it. The bank was just a block away, its sleek glass windows reflecting the glow of streetlights, a fortress of steel, security, and silent alarms. There was no way they were getting in clean, no time for finesse. This was a smash and grab. Reese pulled a duffel from the trunk, unzipped it, and tossed Ramirez a sawed-off shotgun, handing Sarah a compact SMG before shoving extra magazines into his own pockets. Cass checked her pistol, adjusting the holster before looking at Nate. "If we're doing this, we do it fast," she said, her tone sharp, her movements precise. "In and out before Vitelli's people even sniff us." Gabriel was barely standing, leaning against the car, his breath ragged, his face pale. He was running on fumes, but he knew this was his last shot at survival. Nate turned to him. "You know the layout." Gabriel nodded weakly. "The security bank has private deposit boxes on the 3rd floor. You need a key and an access code to open them. I have the code." Nate clenched his jaw. "And the key?" Gabriel swallowed, shifting slightly, then reached into his jacket and pulled out a slim, silver keycard, slick with dried blood. "Took it off the guy they sent to kill me," he muttered. Nate took it, rolling his shoulders, feeling the tension coil in his spine. Once they stepped through those doors, the countdown began. Reese glanced at his watch. "We go in as customers. Keep it quiet as long as we can. Once we have the box, we move. No hesitation." "And if Vitelli's people show up first?" Ramirez asked. Reese chambered around in the shotgun, the sound echoing off the garage walls. "Then we make damn sure they don't walk out." No one argued. They knew they were coming. Nate exhaled, checked his weapon one last time, then led the way up the ramp. The moment they hit the sidewalk, the city swallowed them whole. Lights flashing, people moving, the pulse of Midtown deafening, alive, indifferent to the war about to unfold. They crossed the street in silence, their movements fluid, their minds locked on the target. 3 floors up, inside a metal box, sat the truth that could burn the Vitelli Empire to the ground. They just had to survive long enough to take it. Nate pulled open the door to the bank's lobby, stepped inside, and knew immediately something was wrong. The air was too still. The security guard near the entrance didn't even glance at them. The receptionist's smile was forced, stiff. And behind the polished counters, a man in a dark suit was already watching them. Nate didn't hesitate. He reached for his gun, and then all hell broke loose. Gunfire erupted the second Nate's fingers grazed his weapon. The man in the dark suit whipping out a pistol, squeezing the trigger as bank customers screamed, diving for cover. The first bullet shattered a glass partition, shards raining down like ice. The second tore through a computer monitor, sparking against polished floors. Nate didn't think he moved. Fast, drawing his gun and firing twice. The first shot missing, the second slamming into the gunman's chest, dropping him instantly. Security alarms blared, a deafening wail mixing with the chaos as Sarah and Ramirez hit the floor, returning fire at two more enforcers near the far exit. Cass had already vaulted over a service desk, kicking a banker out of the way as she landed, rolling into cover before unloading a quick, controlled burst at a man taking aim from behind a column. Reese, ever the brute force, yanked a second desk over, using it as a battering ram, charging straight into a guard before slamming his shotgun up under the man's jaw and pulling the trigger. The blast turned the air red. Upstairs, Nate barked, grabbing Gabriel by the arm, dragging him toward the stairwell. His bullets chewed through the walls. Ramirez laid down cover fire, his shotgun booming, ripping chunks out of the marble counters, sending gunmen diving for cover. Sarah reloaded on the run, sprinting beside them as Cass snapped off two more shots, hitting a man just as he reached for an emergency switch. They pushed up the stairs, boots pounding against metal, breath ragged, the distant wail of sirens already approaching. Third floor, almost there. Gabriel stumbled, collapsing against the railing, his breath wheezing. Nate hoisted him up, pushing forward as Cass kicked open the hallway door. More gunmen. The first one barely had time to react before she snapped off a shot, dropping him where he stood. Ramirez and Sarah flanked left, moving fast, pushing toward the vault entrance. The hallway was tight, gunfire deafening, bodies dropping fast. Nate's hands steady as he fired, moved, reloaded, fired again. They reached the vault. One problem, a second door, heavy steel, digital lock. No time to hack it, no way to break it down. Gabriel, Nate shouted, shoving him forward. Gabriel's fingers shook as he pulled out the keycard. He swiped it, punched in the code, missed. Hurry the hell up. Reese growled, snapping his shotgun open, slamming in fresh shells. More gunmen were coming. Gabriel tried again, the lock beeped. Green light. The door hissed open. Inside now, Nate ordered, shoving Gabriel through. Cass spun, fired one last shot into the hallway, then followed. Ramirez and Sarah fell in behind them, covering their retreat as the door slammed shut, sealing them inside the vault. Silence, heavy breathing, the distant thunder of boots outside, trying to break through. Nate turned to Gabriel. Which box? Gabriel staggered forward, letting hands shaking. Here, he gasped, pointing. Box 319. The truth was inside, but they weren't getting out without blood. Nate ripped open the deposit box, his breath heavy, the metallic scent of blood and gunpowder thick in the air, as the steel drawer slid free with a harsh scrape. Inside, a single black flash drive lay nestled between old documents and a bundle of foreign bills, unmarked except for a faint engraving along the side of the government serial number. His stomach tightened. This wasn't just evidence, this was federal. This is it, Gabriel wheezed, gripping the edge of the vault for support, his blood smearing against the cold steel. Ramirez and Sarah stood by the entrance, their weapons trained on the door, the lock blinking red as Vitelli's men worked to override it. They had seconds, maybe less. Cass had already moved to the far wall, scanning for another exit. Her hands brushing along the panels, feeling for something. Reese checked his ammo, rolling his shoulders like a boxer stepping into the ring. We're not walking out of here quiet, he muttered. We make noise, we hit hard, we don't stop moving. Nate clenched his jaw. He knew that. But it wasn't just about surviving anymore. They had the proof. They had Vincent Vitelli dead to rights. Bribery, racketeering, federal collusion. This drive held enough to burn his empire to the ground. But they had to make it out alive first. The vault shuddered violently as the door lock flashed green. A second later, the first explosion hit. The outer doors detonated inward, the force sending a shockwave through the room, shaking the metal lockers, blowing out the lights. Smoke flooded the space, alarm screaming as boots thundered forward. Get down. Ramirez roared, already firing, his shotgun barking. The first enforcer through the breach taken off his feet mid-step. Sarah moved with him, fast and precise, her SMG coughing short. wall!" she shouted over the chaos, slamming the butt of her pistol against a hidden panel. A service hatch. A way out. Not big, not easy, but it was there. Nate grabbed Gabriel, yanking him toward it as Reese tossed a flashbang toward the vault entrance. The detonation screamed through the air, blinding light, swallowing everything. The enforcers stumbled, disoriented, but not for long. They were trained. They'd recover. They had seconds. "Go." Nate shoved Gabriel forward, helping him squeeze through the hatch as Cass climbed in after, her gun still raised, covering their backs. Sarah went next, then Ramirez. Reese was last, holding the line, his shotgun booming one last time before he turned, throwing himself through the opening just as bullets shredded the wall behind him. They were out. Barely. The service tunnel stretched ahead, narrow and dark, the sound of sirens closing in from above. They had to keep moving, but Nate knew it wasn't over. Not yet. Not until Vincent Vitelli was finished. The tunnel stretched ahead, damp and narrow, the scent of mildew and concrete dust clinging to the stale air as Nate forced Gabriel forward. Every step, a battle against exhaustion, against the gunfire still echoing in the vault behind them. The hatch slammed shut, locking their pursuers inside for now, but it wouldn't last. They had minutes, maybe less. Sarah and Ramirez moved ahead, clearing the path as Cass stayed back, watching the rear, gun steady, eyes sharp. Reese gritted his teeth, rolling his shoulder from where a bullet had grazed him in the front, but his grip on the shotgun never wavered. They weren't safe yet. The tunnel curved, leading them to a rusted exit door marked with faded emergency signs, its hinges corroded, its bolts barely holding. Nate threw his weight against it, metal groaning before it finally gave way, spilling them into a dimly lit maintenance corridor beneath a high-rise parking garage. An exit. Their last chance. "Where now?" Ramirez asked, wiping sweat and dirt from his brow. Sirens screamed in the distance, but they weren't headed for them, not yet. Vitelli's men would regroup, but this was their chance to disappear. Nate gripped the flash drive tight, the weight of it heavy in his palm, heavy with everything they had fought for. This was it, the end of the line. You get Gabriel somewhere safe. Nate muttered, but his eyes were locked on Cass. Then he dropped this in the right hands. Cass met his gaze, something unspoken passing between them. For years they had fought the same fight, always outnumbered, always one step behind, always bleeding for a city that didn't deserve saving. But now, for the first time, they had the upper hand. This drive wasn't just evidence. It was a weapon, one that could tear Vincent Vitelli's empire apart, expose every bribe, every payoff, every cop and politician he had in his pocket. No more deals. No more power plays. No more Vincent. Gabriel coughed, his voice raw. Vitelli's still out there. Nate glanced at him, then at the others. Not for long. He pulled out his phone, dialed a number he never thought he'd use. The line rang once, twice, then a voice picked up. "FBI. You want Vitelli?" Nate said, breath steady, tone unshakable. "I've got everything you need." Pause. Then, "You're listening." Nate ended the call. It was over. The fight, the chase. He looked at his team: Sarah, Ramirez, Reese, Cass, bruised, battered, bleeding, but alive. The city stretched ahead, neon lights flickering against the rain-slicked streets, the skyline vast, endless. A new beginning. Cass smirked, holstering her weapon. "So," she said, stepping past him. "Where to?" Nate exhaled. For the first time in years, he finally had an answer. He tucked the drive into his pocket, turned toward the street, and started walking. Forward, into whatever came next, into the future they had just stolen back.